Welcome back to Horror Galaxy. Tonight I have 6 disturbing small-town horror stories for you. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed, because once you step onto the Horror Galaxy, you don't walk alone. I was already standing beside my desk when the teacher called the names, because I knew mine would be last. She always started from the top, tapping the attendance sheet with her pencil, voice calm, routine, like nothing in that room could ever change. I watched her finger move down the page, name by name, until it slowed. I felt my stomach tighten before she said them. The drowned children, the ones everyone pretended not to hear. She spoke their names the same way she spoke ours, without pause, without explanation, and the pencil tapped the desk after each one, marking them present. I looked around to see if anyone else noticed. Most of the kids kept their eyes down. A few stared straight ahead, mouths tight. We had learned not to react. The teacher finished, folded the sheet once, and placed it on her desk as if nothing strange had happened. I sat down slowly, my chair scraping too loud against the floor, my heart beating hard enough that I thought others might hear it. At recess, I asked Ingrid if she heard it too. She nodded but told me to stop talking. She said her mother warned her that asking questions made trouble. I pressed anyway, whispering the names I remembered from the ferry accident, the ones carved into the memorial stone near the dock. Ingrid covered my mouth with her mitten and told me they didn't like being remembered out loud. That afternoon, I waited until the classroom emptied before approaching the teacher's desk. The attendance sheet lay there, edges curled, ink slightly faded. I could see the names clearly. They were written in the same typeface as mine, same spacing, same alignment. I asked where the sheet came from. She told me, without looking up, that they arrived from the district office every winter, pre-printed and sealed. She said it had always been that way. I told her the ferry sank before I was born. She finally met my eyes then. Her expression wasn't angry or afraid. It was tired. She said the office never updated the list after the accident. She said correcting it caused confusion. Then she asked me to return to my seat. That night, I dreamed of standing in the classroom alone, listening to names echo from the walls. When I woke, my mother was already up, packing my bag. I asked her about the ferry. Her hands paused mid-motion. She said it was a long time ago and not for children to worry about. When I told her the names were still on the attendance sheet, she closed my bag too quickly and said nothing more. The next morning, one of the drowned children's names was answered. A soft voice said here. It came from the back of the room. Every head turned. No one was there. The teacher hesitated only a second before marking the name present. I felt something cold move through me, like the moment before slipping on ice. By the end of the week, more voices answered. Always quiet. Always polite. Always from empty spaces. The teacher never reacted. Neither did most of the class. But I started noticing wet footprints beneath certain desks, fading before lunch. I smelled cold water sometimes, sharp and metallic, clinging to the air near the coat hooks. I followed the footprints one day after class. They led to the storage room near the old boiler. Inside, stacked behind broken chairs, were boxes of attendance sheets dating back decades. Every winter, the same names appeared. Never removed, never reduced. The class grew on paper even as real desks stayed empty. I brought one sheet home and showed my mother. She sat heavily at the table and told me the truth. The ferry was overloaded. The town knew it. The school had insisted on sending the children anyway. After the sinking, keeping the names became a way of pretending no one was missing. As long as they were marked present, the guilt stayed quiet. The voices stopped the next day. The footprints vanished. The attendance sheet arrived with fewer names. Only the living ones. The teacher cried when she saw it. Years later, the memorial stone was cleaned, and the school finally held a service. Sometimes I still hear a soft voice say here in my head, but it feels finished now, like a lesson finally learned. I was pushing the linen trolley down the corridor when the bell rang, sharp and polite, the kind meant to ask for help. I stopped because that sound wasn't supposed to exist anymore. The sealed ward had been closed for years, doors locked, signs posted, equipment stripped. Yet every night at the same hour, the bell rang once, then again, always with the same careful rhythm. I checked my watch out of habit and felt my stomach drop. It was the exact minute the nurse had died. I worked nights because I needed the money and because nights were predictable. Patients slept, alarms stayed quiet, and the building felt honest about what it was. That bell ruined the pattern. I radioed security the first time it happened, and they told me what everyone told me. Faulty wiring, pressure changes. Old buildings make noises. Still, I walked to the end of the corridor and stood there, staring at the door with the red seal across its handle, listening to the silence after the ringing stopped. The next night it happened again. Same minute. Same single ring followed by a pause, then another. I waited for security to arrive so I wouldn't be alone, but the radio crackled and died. When they finally came, they showed me the camera feed. The corridor outside the sealed ward was empty. No shadows, no movement. Nothing that could reach the bell mounted inside the nurses' station, beyond the locked doors. I asked about the murder, quietly, like you ask about a scar. The older guard sighed and told me not to chase stories. He said the patient had been restrained, then wasn't. Then everything went wrong. He said the ward was sealed to protect the hospital's reputation, not because anything lingered. He left before the bell rang again, and it rang anyway. After a week, the bell felt personal. It rang when I was closest, never when I was on another floor. I started timing my rounds to avoid the minute, but something always delayed me. A call light, a spill, a patient asking for water. I would end up there, heart racing, listening. The sound wasn't loud, but it cut through everything. I began reviewing the logs during breaks. The nurse's name appeared on incident reports, followed by apologies written in careful administrative language. The patient's file was thin, almost empty. The service bell was mentioned once, noted as damaged during the incident, replaced, then removed when the ward closed. I stood there with the folder open, realizing the bell shouldn't even be there. One night, I brought a chair and sat outside the sealed doors, back against the wall, determined to see something change. When the minute came, the bell rang once. I stood and pressed my ear to the door. I could hear breathing on the other side, shallow and fast, like someone trying not to be noticed. I said, "Hello," my voice cracking. The breathing stopped. The bell rang again. I went to the administrator the next morning and told him everything. He listened, face tight. then admitted the truth. The bell was never removed. It was left because removing it required acknowledging the murder formally. The hospital chose quiet instead. The ringing was the sound of a system refusing silence. I started talking to other orderlies, quietly, during handover. Most shrugged, but one woman told me she used to hear it too. She said it rang for weeks, then stopped the night a report was altered. She wouldn't say which. Only that the bell responded to records, not people. That idea stuck with me, gnawing, making me wonder what else the building was listening to. I felt watched, not by eyes, but by forms, files, and quiet approvals stamped without thought. I began requesting access to archived footage, citing training. The tapes were grainy, but consistent. Every night at the same minute, the bell rang. The camera showed nothing moving, yet the audio spiked exactly. I noticed something else. The timestamp glitched for a breath, repeating itself before correcting. It felt like the system was hesitating, unsure whether to continue. Watching it alone, I felt complicit, like by observing I was helping it persist. My hands shook when I logged out, afraid of what I might find next. I confronted the head nurse on nights, a woman who had trained under the one who died. She listened carefully, then told me the truth in pieces. The patient had asked for help. The bell was rung because restraints were wrong. The call went unanswered. Afterward, reports were softened, times adjusted, responsibility blurred. She said the bell rang because it was never answered, because records insisted everything had been fine. Her eyes filled, and she told me to stop digging if I wanted peace. I couldn't stop. I started matching reports to footage, notes to timestamps, building a quiet map of avoidance. Every adjustment lined up with a ring. The bell wasn't asking for attention. It was marking errors. Each night, it counted what had been ignored. When I realized that, fear shifted into resolve. I wasn't being haunted. I was being audited. The thought steadied me, even as the minute approached again. I prepared carefully. I documented everything, copies of reports, logs, and footage, sealed in envelopes. I requested a formal review, citing compliance. When the night came, I stood outside the ward with the box ready. The bell rang once. I spoke out loud, apologizing to no one in particular, then unlocked the door. My hands were steady. I wasn't afraid anymore. I removed the bell and replaced it with nothing. The sound didn't protest. It simply ended. In the days that followed, the review happened. Files were corrected. Times restored. A letter went out acknowledging failure. The hospital changed, slowly, visibly. The sealed ward was finally documented, not hidden. I watched the building breathe easier. So did I. I stayed through the fallout, answered questions, signed statements. Some people avoided me. Others thanked me quietly. Nights became quiet again, truly. I realized how much sound we tolerate when it protects comfort. The bell had been a conscience, crude but persistent. Without it, the work felt cleaner. I slept better, though dreams lingered. I left the job a year later, not because of fear, but because I had learned what staying silent costs. When I pass hospitals now, I listen. Not for bells, but for what they record. That night taught me that places remember differently than people. They keep time honestly, waiting for someone to answer. I was glad I did. I tell you this because it still matters to me. The ringing wasn't supernatural. It was procedural. A failure repeated until acknowledged. Once we faced it, it stopped. That feels right. Some nights I remember the sound, but it doesn't haunt me. It reminds me to answer. Always. And if you ever hear something small and polite asking for help, don't dismiss it. Look closer. Check the records. Fix what you can. Silence earned through honesty is better than quiet bought by denial. I learned that here. The bell taught me. I was halfway through clearing the outer loop when the GPS chirped and told me to turn left, straight into a street that no longer existed. I said no out loud, like the machine could hear me, and kept the plow moving forward. My hands were tight on the wheel, jaw clenched, eyes fixed ahead. I had driven these routes for years. That street had been erased after the explosion. There was nothing there to clear. The GPS recalculated immediately and told me to turn left again. Same calm voice, same confidence. I reached over and muted it, my pulse hammering harder than the engine. I finished the shift without incident, or so I thought, until I walked my dog that afternoon and saw the tracks. Fresh, clean plow lines cutting through untouched snow, curving exactly where the street used to be. I stood there longer than I meant to, staring at the pattern. The tires were mine. Same width, same slight drift on the right side where the alignment pulled. I told myself someone else must have driven through, some contractor, some mistake. But the city had fenced the area after leveling the remains. No one was allowed in. The next night, the GPS did it again. Same instruction, same point in the route. I kept refusing, kept driving past. I covered my assigned streets carefully, double checking intersections, making sure I stayed where I was supposed to be. When my shift ended, I checked the vehicle log. The system showed I had completed the removed street, start to finish, with perfect timing. I brought it up with my supervisor the following morning. He rubbed his face and said the mapping software hadn't been fully updated. He said glitches happened. I told him about the tracks. He said snow moves, people imagine patterns, and maybe I was tired. I left his office feeling small and stupid, but the knot in my chest stayed tight. On the third night, I parked near the old perimeter and waited. I shut off the engine and listened to the quiet hum of the cab. When the time came, the GPS unmuted itself and spoke without prompting. Turn left. I didn't touch the wheel. I didn't even breathe. The instruction repeated, firmer somehow. My hands started shaking, and that scared me more than the voice. I finished the route late and drove home with the radio off. At dawn, I went back on foot. The tracks were there again, clearer than before, the blade marks sharp. They passed straight through the fence as if it wasn't there. Beyond it, the ground dipped where houses once stood. I remembered the explosion, the sound rolling through town, the weeks of funerals. I remembered the street name, though no one used it anymore. I requested the old route files from the depot, saying I wanted to help update the system. Late that night, alone in the office, I pulled up archived data. The street was still there, flagged as active, with my name assigned as primary operator. The date stamp updated every morning. The system believed I was driving it because, in some way, I was. I didn't sleep before the next shift. When the GPS spoke, I answered it. I told it the street was gone, that people had died, that there was nothing left. The screen flickered, then displayed a message I had never seen before. Route incomplete. Clearance required. My throat tightened. Clearance for what? I didn't know. I drove to the perimeter and stopped. The fence gate stood open. I know it had been locked. I eased forward, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The snow beyond was deeper, untouched except for the familiar tracks leading ahead. I followed them slowly, every sense sharp, not expecting ghosts, just expecting proof. The street emerged as I drove, subtle at first, then clear. Curbs pressed up through the snow. Driveways reappeared as shallow ramps. I remembered the houses, where families lived, where lights once glowed. The GPS guided me gently, turn by turn. I lowered the blade and cleared the length of the road, breathing shallow, refusing to look away. At the end, the GPS fell silent. The street faded behind me as I turned back, dissolving into uneven ground. By morning, there were no tracks. No fence gap, no street. The route file was gone from the system, fully removed. My logs showed an incomplete shift, flagged and closed. The GPS has never tried to send me there again. I still drive the same routes, still check the mirrors too often. What I understand now is this: the street wasn't asking to exist. It was asking to be finished. Snow covers things, so does neglect. Clearing it didn't bring anyone back, but it let the system stop pretending. Sometimes, doing the job means going where you're told not to, just once, to make sure nothing is left undone. I was standing at the microfilm reader when I first noticed the basement entries, fingers sliding along the frame counter, eyes burning from hours of dust and stale air. The census form was ordinary until the address column dipped below street level. Basement unit, it said, typed cleanly, repeated again and again beneath houses I knew never had basements. I leaned closer, heart thudding, because the names beside those entries were unfamiliar, yet the handwriting matched the rest of the page perfectly. I pulled another reel, then another. Different years, same pattern. Basements listed where no basements existed. Entire families recorded as living underground. Parents, children, ages carefully updated every decade. I felt a slow unease settle in my chest, the kind that doesn't spike but spreads, because records aren't supposed to improvise. They repeat mistakes, yes, but they don't invent consistent lives. I cross-checked property files. The houses stood on slab foundations. No permits, no renovations, no subterranean units. I told myself it was a clerical shorthand, some outdated code. Then I checked missing persons reports, expecting nothing. My mouth went dry as the first name matched, then the second, then all of them. Each basement family had vanished in a different decade, reported missing, never found. I remember sitting back in my chair, palms flat on the desk, trying to slow my breathing. This was 1987. Everything mattered on paper. If something didn't exist in the records, it didn't exist at all. And yet here were people who existed nowhere else. I told myself to log it and move on. That was my job. But I couldn't. I started visiting the addresses after work, just to see. Each house looked ordinary. I knocked once at each, asked vague questions, pretending to confirm tax records. The residents were polite, confused, a little wary. None had basements. One laughed and said the ground was too shallow here, too close to bedrock. I laughed too, but my hands shook afterward. Back at the office, I noticed something new. The basement entries updated themselves. Ages advanced. Children grew into adults. New children appeared, listed as born underground. I hadn't touched those reels. No one else accessed them. I logged the anomaly, then erased the note, afraid of how it sounded. The smell started after that. Damp mineral, like earth turned too long. It followed me between aisles. Once, late, I heard a low thump beneath my feet, steady, rhythmic. I told myself it was the building settling. When I checked the floor plans, there was no lower level beneath records. I finally told my supervisor. He listened quietly, then closed the door. He said some errors weren't meant to be corrected. He said previous archivists had chased similar patterns and left the job shortly after. One, he admitted, was listed as missing. I asked where he lived. He wouldn't answer. That night I dreamed of forms stacked like bricks, pressed together until no air remained. I woke with the smell in my nose. In the morning, a new census supplement sat on my desk. One new basement entry. My address? I felt cold spread through me, slow and deliberate. The listed occupant was me, age correct, occupation accurate. Basement unit. I checked the missing persons file and saw my name already typed, date blank. That was when I understood. The records weren't wrong. They were hungry. They made room by moving people where they could be contained, flattened into ink and paper, stored where no one looked. I didn't panic. Panic wastes time. I pulled every basement reel and carried them to the furnace room. My hands were steady. I fed the film into the fire one by one. The smell changed, sharp and chemical. As the last reel burned, the thumping stopped. The next day, the census shelves were empty where those reels had been. No gaps, no labels. The missing persons files still existed. But the basement families were gone from them too, as if they had never been reported at all. My address was normal again. I quit 2 weeks later. Sometimes I still check public records, just to be sure. Basements appear now and then, briefly, before disappearing. When they do, I make a call. Paper shouldn't decide where people belong. Someone has to watch it. Someone always has to watch. I slammed my locker shut when the bell rang, the metal echoing down the corridor. And that was when I felt the heat. It brushed my knuckles. Soft and wrong, like breathing against skin. I pulled my hand back and stared at locker 47, the one nobody used. The one at the end near the maintenance door. Frost clung to every other locker handle, but that door radiated warmth. I pressed my palm to it again, just to be sure. Warm. Not imagined. Not left over from a heater. Warm like a body that had been there too long. My stomach twisted and I stepped back, heart hammering, listening for footsteps. The corridor was empty. I told myself it was pipes, bad insulation, something boring. But I kept watching that locker until my fingers went numb. At dinner, I told Jonas, whispering over our trays. He laughed at first, then stopped when he saw my face. He said that locker had been sealed since before we arrived. He said nobody had a key. When I asked why, he shrugged and said accidents happened at boarding schools. The way he said it made my skin crawl. That night I went back alone. The warmth was stronger, seeping through the metal, fogging the air in front of it when I breathed. I leaned close and heard something faint inside. Not scratching, not knocking. Just a low, steady sound, like someone trying to stay calm. I pressed my ear closer, holding my breath, counting the pauses, realizing they matched breathing. I ran before I could hear more. The next day I checked the notice board outside the headmaster's office. Old papers were pinned there, curling at the edges. One maintenance report caught my eye. Locker 47. Insulation anomaly. Door malfunction. Student confinement incident. I read the last line 3 times. Student did not return home. My legs went weak and I sat on the floor until a prefect told me to move. I asked a teacher about it during study hall. She told me not to dig through old documents and sent me back to my desk. Her hands shook when she closed the file drawer. That night the warmth spread. I could feel it standing 2 lockers away, like standing near a radiator. Other students noticed now. Nobody touched it. People started changing in silence. On the 4th night, the sound changed. It wasn't steady anymore. It came in short bursts, uneven, desperate. I stood there shaking, telling myself I was imagining it, until the metal clicked softly from the inside. I whispered hello without meaning to. The sound paused, then resumed faster. I ran to the dorm and didn't sleep. I dreamed of folded knees and shallow breaths. I dreamed of counting seconds to stay awake. I woke up crying, my sheets damp with sweat. In the morning, the locker was hotter than ever, almost painful to stand near. I went to the boiler room and found the caretaker. I told him everything, words tumbling out, expecting anger. He sat heavily and finally told me the truth. A boy had been locked inside as a prank during winter inspection. The door jammed. They heard banging but assumed it was pipes. By morning, it was too late. The school sealed the locker and paid the family to stay quiet. They said removing it would invite questions. I asked why it was warm. He swallowed and said heat rises, and guilt doesn't dissipate. He said the boy had tried to keep himself alive by moving, by breathing, by pressing against the door. The metal remembered. It held what the school refused to carry. That evening, the caretaker unlocked the maintenance door. He handed me the key to the locker with shaking hands and said someone had to finish it. I didn't understand until we stood there together, the heat pulsing like a heart. He opened the door. Inside was nothing, no body, no marks, just warmth pouring out, then fading fast, like a breath released. The sound stopped. The locker cooled beneath my hand. I felt relief and shame in equal measure. The next day, the locker was removed. Students stopped whispering. A small notice went up about safety improvements. I stayed until graduation, then left. Years later, I still press my palm to cold metal sometimes, just to remind myself that being heard matters, even too late, and silence can keep things alive. I never told my parents what happened. I wrote letters home about classes, about food, about missing them. I didn't know how to explain that a building could remember a child better than the people inside it. Every time I passed that end of the corridor, my body reacted before my mind did, shoulders tensing, breath shortening, expecting heat that was no longer there. After the locker was removed, the space felt wrong, like a missing tooth. The wall behind it was scarred, paint bubbled as if it had been exposed to fire. Maintenance covered it quickly. The caretaker avoided my eyes. We never spoke about it again. He retired that spring. Rumors spread anyway. Students filled the gap with stories, most of them wrong. I didn't correct them. I didn't want the truth turned into entertainment. The truth was quieter. It was a boy trying to stay alive by staying warm, by staying moving, by staying hopeful longer than anyone should have to. Years later, when I finally looked up the records myself, I found his name. It had been removed from school files, but not from local newspapers. One small article, a tragic accident. I printed it and folded it into my wallet. I still carry it. What stays with me isn't fear, it's responsibility. The locker didn't want to scare us. It wanted acknowledgement. It wanted the weight lifted. I think about that when people dismiss small warnings, small discomforts, small sounds. I think about how easy it is to look away. I tell you this because you asked why I still check doors before locking them. Why I press my hand against metal when rooms feel wrong. It's habit now, and memory. That locker taught me that neglect has temperature. That silence can trap more than noise ever could. And that sometimes the only way to cool something down is to finally open it. I have never gone back to that school, but I still dream of corridors lined with lockers, each one waiting. In the dreams, I walk slowly, counting steps, listening for changes in sound, for anything that feels alive when it should not. I wake with my hands clenched, nails biting into my palms, reminding myself I am grown now. That door's open when I turn the handle. Still, I think of that boy often, not as a ghost, but as a person whose last comfort came from his own effort. If warmth is proof of life, then his life deserved better witnesses. That belief stays with me, heavy but useful, guiding how I notice things others ignore, how I stop and listen when something feels off, how I refuse to laugh at accidents that hide intention. Some lessons don't fade. They cool slowly, if ever. I tell this story carefully, because truth matters more than comfort. And remembering is sometimes the only justice left when systems choose convenience over care. That is why I keep speaking, even when my voice shakes. It still feels necessary to do so. I was already halfway through unloading the bread when I noticed the date on the receipt was wrong. I stood there with the crate balanced on my knee, pen in my mouth, staring at the paper like it might correct itself. Tomorrow's date, cleanly printed. I checked my watch, then the calendar taped inside the van. Today. Definitely today. I laughed once, uneasy, and told myself the printer was misaligned. Mrs. Kearney signed without looking, the way she always did, quick and practiced. Her signature curved the same way it always had. I handed her the crate, took the receipt, and drove on, thinking about nothing more than finishing the route on time. I didn't think about the date again until noon, when the radio cut into the music to report her death. Heart attack behind the counter. Found by a regular. I pulled over so fast I stalled the engine. I remember gripping the steering wheel and feeling stupid for shaking. People die. Shop owners die. But when I pulled the receipt from my pocket again, the date was still tomorrow. Her signature was still wet, looking darker than the rest of the ink, like it hadn't fully dried yet. I brought it up at the bakery that afternoon, trying to sound casual. The manager frowned and said printers mess up sometimes. He told me not to overthink it. I wanted to believe him. The next morning, I loaded the van and started the route anyway. The second stop was a small grocer on the edge of town. Same thing. Tomorrow's date. Same clean print. Mr. O'Sullivan signed, smiling, asking about my mother. I left with a knot in my stomach. He died before lunch. Stroke, they said. I didn't need the radio this time. I knew before I heard. I sat in the van behind the shop, receipt in my hand, trying to convince myself there had to be a list somewhere. A coincidence. Anything. Two could be chance. Two could be my brain looking for patterns. The third receipt broke me. Same thing. Tomorrow's date. Same pen. Same pressure in the signature. I didn't finish the rote. I drove back to the bakery and dumped the crates, hands slick with sweat. I showed the receipts to my manager. He went pale, then angry, accusing me of a sick joke. He told me to go home. I spent the night lining the receipts up on my kitchen table, checking every detail. Same printer code, same paper batch. The dates marched forward, one day ahead of me, like the paper was walking faster than time. I didn't sleep. At dawn, the phone rang. The third shop owner was dead. I tried to quit that morning. The manager told me to calm down, said grief was playing tricks on me. He needed me on the road. People depended on the deliveries. I almost believed him. Then I saw the stack of blank receipts in the office printer tray and felt sick. On the road, every stop felt like a choice I was making. I tried refusing signatures, leaving crates without paperwork. The receipts printed anyway, signatures appearing later when I checked them, as if the paper was patient, as if it didn't need the person present. Every name matched. Every date was tomorrow. By the fourth death, the Gardaí were involved. They questioned me gently, then less gently. I showed them the receipts. They took copies, then the originals. The next morning, the originals were back on my table, smelling faintly of ink, as if they had never left. I stopped delivering. I told the bakery I was sick. The death stopped too. For 3 days, nothing happened. I started to breathe again. On the fourth day, a receipt appeared under my door. Tomorrow's date. My manager's name. His signature. I drove to his house without thinking. I banged on the door until he answered, confused and annoyed. I shoved the receipt at him, yelling, trying to explain. He told me to leave or he'd call the Gardaí. I stayed in the car across the street until morning. He died just after dawn, collapsing in his driveway. That was when I understood. It wasn't the delivery. It was the acknowledgement. The signature was consent. The receipt marked the moment someone agreed the future would arrive. I stopped the route entirely. I burned the receipts I could find. The printer jammed and sparked when I tried to destroy it. I smashed it with a hammer until it stopped. No more receipts appeared after that. No more dates ahead of me. I left the job, left Tralee, left bread behind entirely. People still die, of course. But now it's messy again, unpredictable. Human. I tell you this because you asked why I flinch when someone hands me paper to sign. Why I always check the date twice. I don't believe in fate the way I used to. I believe in small agreements we make without thinking. Sometimes, refusing to sign is the only way to stay alive.